live now. I should be saying something pithy. Up here? All right, you tell me when I screw up. Don't point it away from me. Point it at your mouth. I hate microphones. You get used to that. Some of the stars in the audience. We're all ready. Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Farfan, and I'd like to welcome you all to the launch of QAHN's 4th annual series of short documentaries. Welcome everyone as well who are tuning in to this live event online via Facebook and YouTube. Glenn Patterson, as usual, is handling our live stream. He's that character over in the corner, with a little help from Alison Kirkwood and Julie Marlowe. We are here once again at beautiful Uplands in Lennoxville, and we love doing things here because it's such a beautiful venue. Now, our first 3 documentary series were called Scandal Makers. Those series focused on the unsavory dead people buried in our crumbling country graveyards. 15 films took us to burial grounds in Missisquoi, Stansted, Compton, Three Rivers, Nicollet, and Drummondville. This year, we've changed gears a little bit. Raising Spirits, exploring the cemeteries, crossroads, and vanishing places of rural Quebec, takes us on a journey into some of the truly forgotten places of Quebec's eastern townships. Once again this year, Heather Darch is our host. Thank you, Heather, for all of your research and for pulling it all together. I'm very excited to see Series 4. Of course, every film has someone behind the camera, and this year that person is Alison Kirkwood. Alison is a talented camerawoman. There she is at the back with her camera. And drone operator. Fortunately, she's also a meticulous film editor. How else could you distill hours and hours of raw footage, albeit excellent raw footage, into just a few coherent minutes? Now, we've found some excellent guests again this year, and I think I see some of them in the audience here. Hopefully they're all here. And without the colorful history and storytelling abilities of Maurice Crossfield, Marcel Helligan, Rebecca McMillan, Steve Moore, and George Weller, these films would not have been possible. I'd be remiss if I failed to mention our wonderful sponsors. Thank you, Canadian Heritage and Townshippers Research and Cultural Foundation. We could not have done it without you. I also want to acknowledge we have several of our wonderful QAHN board members here today, and I see them in the back. There's Grant Myers, our president, Joanne Oberg, our treasurer, and Anne Montgomery in the second row. Thank you all for coming. Finally, for those of us who don't know by now, QAHN is a province-wide, member-based organization. Without the support of our members, programming like this would be quite a challenge. So I encourage everyone here and online, if they are not already a member, please do sign up. As an added incentive, we're offering a special today during this event. Membership for a year is only $20. That's a steal. Anyway, there are magazines, some books, lots of pamphlets at the back. Help yourselves, they're all free, but do join up if you like what we do. Thank you, and I'm going to pass this over to Heather Darch.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, and welcome, everyone. This has been a wonderful experience, creating QAHN's first Raising Spirits mini documentary series with the very talented Alison Kirkwood. I told you I was going to talk about you. Who, as you will discover, has a creative eye, a talent for filmmaking, and mad skills for flying a drone. In what was on record to be the hottest temperatures in recorded human history, Alison and I were out traveling forgotten places, finding little cemetery sites and crossroads that we had never been to before, and in some cases had never even heard of, and where we were delighted to meet fellow history enthusiasts. Each place had its own character, whether it was gray skies and pouring rain, right, Morris? Or bright blue skies under an intense sun, as you will see how sweaty I am in some of the films, to curious railway workers, and believe me, they were way more curious in the two young women I was walking with than they were in me. I get it, those days are gone. Or whether it was watching out for an enormous wasp nest that we had to keep an eye on, or the menagerie of animals that were completely unconcerned about us standing in what was now their village. Each place had its own way, a specialness about it. And as you will soon see, each of our guest presenters was unique too, each with their own viewpoints and reflections on the lost places and crossroads we were looking for and at one time had been bustling little busy places. In the Raising Spirits series, we are peering into the past to discover why communities in rural locations in the Eastern Townships fell by the wayside and what can be learned about their quiet demise. We wanted to make the documentaries entertaining, but they're also factual and well-researched so that we can bring local stories to life. These places had people who had jobs and families and busy lives, and they not only had joy and success in life, but also endured misfortune. We tend to think of ghost towns as an old phenomenon or something out west, but it's actually not the case. Since the 1840s, more than 10,000 communities in Canada have vanished, and communities are still collapsing all the time. So perhaps the places and history revealed in these films can offer lessons that we can still learn from today. Research shows that most communities die within 60 years of their founding, suggesting that if a community can just make it beyond the third generation, it will have staying power. At the very least with these films, we can keep the memory of these communities and some of their family names in our minds. Every place has a story, and by getting to know some of them and the people buried in some of the cemetery sites, we hope to encourage people to learn more about the abandoned places near them and where they live, and being advocates for protecting what is left. This is Raising Spirits. Hi, I'm Heather Darch, and this is a presentation by the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. Many small rural villages and hamlets scattered across the province have disappeared over time and are now nearly forgotten. In this series called Raising Spirits, we are telling the stories of our vanishing heritage. We are looking for what remains of early settlements in Quebec's eastern townships. The foundations of homes, schools, mills, and churches represent little communities that were, at one time, filled with life. We are telling these stories before they disappear forever. This is Malmaison.
I got interested in the history because being born here and grew up here and listening to some of the stories of the people that were my neighbors at the time, mostly Hennigans, Patrick, Kathleen, Norman, they would tell the stories about this great little town that was here. And so I became curious, and when I had some free time, I would go off to the local museum and pick up a paper or something and read about the history of this local area. And as a result, I became a little bit of not an expert, believe me, but I became to know how this town came about, how it lost its vigor, and what happened after to its present state. My name is Marcel Halligan. I am right now presently located in the present-day town of Notre Dame de Stambridge, but where we are located today used to be the hamlet of Malmaison. Malmaison was the result of a family called the Desrivières who established themselves around the 1830s. Around 1841, 42, and 43, they built a manoir house, a covered bridge, a grist mill, a dam, and the school behind me, which was built much later to help with the children that was in the village of Malmaison. Malmaison came about because the people who work for the Desrivières family needed a place to live, and therefore they built their homes close to where they worked. There were approximately 8 or 9 houses, I believe, on this side of the river, and there were a couple on the other side that worked at the grist mill. Now, how did the Desrivières family acquire this piece of land? In 1800, Mr. Hugh Finlay requested to the Crown that he receive a land grant. And in 1801, he was granted the canton of Stambridge, which was 31,000 acres, with partners. And one of his partners was James McGill. Hugh Finlay was a businessman in Montreal, like James McGill, in the fur trade, general merchandise, and also the first Postmaster General of Canada. But a year later, due to financial troubles, he sold his shares to James McGill, who acquired most of the canton, with other people who still had minority shares. Although it was often rumored that James McGill came to the canton, he never did. He died in 1813 and never set foot on this property. James McGill married a widow who had 2 children. The widow was the wife of one of his business partners, and these 2 sons acquired the property from the McGill estate. One died because of a duel, and the other one had 2 sons, which he later left the canton to, and they were the first Desrivières members who came to this canton. François Guillaume and his brother Henri eventually were curious about what they had inherited, and about 1830, François showed up, decided he liked the area, built a house, and 10 years later, his brother, who was curious about why his older brother was coming down here, decided that yes, this was a good business opportunity, and therefore they built the manor house, the grist mill, covered bridge, and a sawmill, all at about that time. And then as a result of their influence in this area, people gravitated to this area, lived in this area, and that's how Malmaison came about. As the village grew, there was a church built not far away. A post office was eventually built here as the Central Vermont Railroad passed within a half a mile of here. And the school behind me were all built about 1863. So the school, the general store, post office, and the train station were approximately all about the same period of time. This is the grist mill side and the carding mill. As you can see, there are several lots in the back of it where the employees of this part of the complex live. The sawmill was in this little point here, the first sawmill, and the dam was across the river here. This is the part of the Malmaison that I own. My parents' house, or where I grew up, is this lot at the front. And the general store, which is now attached to the back of that house, used to be on this corner lot, right here on the corner of this road, St. Charles and de Riviere. The school we're in now is on this lot, which was up the road. The manoir is located here at this part of the property. And the second sawmill is located at this state, right about approximately here. This is the one that has the steam engine. If you look a little bit farther to the north, you will see this used to be the original church emplacement, and a little bit farther north is the present-day cemetery, which is still in existence and still being maintained as of today. These are the names of the people that lived in Malmaison. Now, how did our family wind up in this part of the world? My grandparents were from Belgium, and after the war, there were not a lot of possibilities. My grandparents grew up on small farms, and they heard about this great country, Canada. My father was in the process of marrying my mother, who was the daughter of my grandfather, and he decided that he was going to tag along. So in the fall of 1951, they got on a ship in Belgium, went over to England, got onto a bigger boat, and came to Canada. And as my grandfather was looking for land, there was a lot of other immigrants, Belgian, Germans, Swiss, in this area. So he felt that it was a good place. He liked the way the location of the land. So in 1951, he bought the farm that was originally the major location of Malmaison. Now, what caused the village to decline? Well, as the years went on, the children of the two de Riviere brothers were taking over the estate, and unfortunately one of them wasn't a very good businessman, not like his uncle and his brother. After a few years of bad management, he was known to be a gambler. He loved horse racing, and unfortunately during a horse race he had an accident and became more or less incapacitated. He ran the estate poorly and lost much of it for reasons of payments to other people. The people that had worked for the de Riviere family, some were French Canadian, some were Irish, and the most important Irish name that keeps showing up is the Hennigan family. The Hennigan family had settled on a farm on the next range over, and that's where they first settled. But having a large family, many of the sons had to find work other places, and a couple of them were employed by the de Riviere family. Being astute men, they acquired over time the assets of the de Riviere family, which mostly were in the wood business. They were lumber merchants. They also were hay merchants. They took over the sawmill. And eventually, when Willie, which was Francois Guillaume, died, his wife could no longer support the estate and sold it to the Hennigan family. So therefore, the de Riviere family ended in about that period of time, and the lumber industry was declining. The grist mill had competition from the next town over, which was known at that time as St. Charles. It was growing faster than the town here, and therefore more people gravitated towards the new town, and that eventually became the town we're in today, which is Notre Dame de Stambridge. The sawmill, which is now fallen down, is actually the second sawmill. The first sawmill was water powered. The second sawmill was steam powered. But when steam became out of step, when electricity came, that went down. So the business of the town of Malmaison more or less dissipated. People moved out of this town. They moved in next door, which is just a couple of kilometers down the road. And they took up residence there and no longer here. The farm was mortgaged to a bank, which had all the lots from the original Malmaison, so that the John Hennigan, who acquired the manoir, and the remaining estate of the de Rivières could afford to buy it. The bank held on to it and leased it out to people for a couple of years, and finally, eventually, a Darrenot family acquired the farm, which became one single unit, no longer a town. And in 1951, my grandfather bought it from the Darrenot family, and that's how I became owner of the Maison. There are some very interesting vestiges still of the town. My parents lived in the house that was built by John Hennigan in approximately 1886. It's still standing. Behind the original house that my parents were in, the original post office and general store was moved when John Hennigan acquired it, and it was put behind the house and used as a summer kitchen for the main house because there was no air conditioning in those days. And when they had the wood stove going, they didn't want it in the main house, so they had a summer kitchen, and they used the old general store as their summer kitchen. The Maison is not off the map because we still have the original grist mill and carding mill. We still have the bridge that is standing. We still have vestiges of the dam on the riverbanks. We still have the manoir house, and we still have the one-room schoolhouse, which is the second version. The first version wasn't as tall. It was not a story and a half. It was only one story. But later it was modified to add an apartment upstairs for the teacher to stay when she was here, when the school season was open. Otherwise, she would have to stay in the house that was next door to the school with the people who lived there. So as the town has disappeared in the sense of having more than 150 to sometimes maybe 200 people had lived here at one time on the two sides of the river. Now, as you can see, I am, with my son, I'm the only residents of Maison. But that's the short history of the town, and it's now a part of just legend, and the people who live here, especially the Hennigan family, who are the last vestiges and owners of the original nameplates. My interest, and I feel sorry about this, is that the people who live in this area don't know the history of this area. They don't understand that the people, how they worked, how they cleared the land, and how at one time this was a very large hub of commerce. And how could it disappear? And it was simply the fortunes of lumber, a situation where the town next door got bigger and the people liked it better, and there were some richer people in the next town over from the de Rivières, and they built a knitting mill, and at one time that knitting mill alone employed close to 200 people, and therefore all the emphasis moved to the town of, which was at that time not called Notre Dame but St. Charles. And I think it was only in 1912 that the two towns actually refused. Maison, which was actually known as Notre Dame des Anges, was amalgamated with St. Charles to become the town of Notre Dame de Stambridge. And therefore, it no longer was on the maps, it disappeared, and the only remains of the de Rivière family and all the people that worked here is the school, the bridge, the mill, and the manoir house.
There we go, Maison. I don't think Marcel is here, which is too bad. If you have any questions, perhaps I can answer them. I live only a few kilometers up the road from Maison in Pike River, so I'll do my best. Yeah, go ahead in the back. We're going to pass a microphone around so people on Facebook, hi Facebook. Can hear you.
Okay, actually, I wasn't sure if he explained it in the video, but what is the origin of Malmaison, the name?
Well, according to Marcel, it comes from France. He believes it came from Napoleon's, one of his manor houses. And so there's a myth that Malmaison was named after Napoleon's manor house. But if you look carefully at the manor house in France, it doesn't look anything like the manoir in Malmaison. And it's actually from another village called Malmaison with a house that looks very similar. So somewhere in the murky past, it was attached to Napoleon, and that's really incorrect. So, but the name comes from France.
Thank you.
Other questions? I was going to tell you that Marcel is very passionate about his community, and about 10 years ago, he convinced the municipality of Notre-Dame-de-Stambridge to create roadside panels. And so a lot of the information that is on the roadside panels was actually from Marcel's research. He had a small committee with him, Heritage Stambridgeoise as well. So they had a great plan to actually use the schoolhouse for school children to do special events there and for the community to hold, parties and whatnot. But unfortunately, sometimes municipal vision is short-sighted, and so the money was cut after a few years. And so Marcel now is the owner of the schoolhouse and is trying to figure out what to do with it. And as he said, he's the only person who lives in Malmaison now. So it's a bit of a struggle, and he's doing his best to keep the story alive about this community, and its connection to James McGill and Montreal. But slowly but surely, people will forget. But thanks to his participation, more people will know about Malmaison. I guess it means bad house, poor house, bad house. It's still.
It's named the House of Malmaison in France was one of the mistresses of Louis XIV.
Aha, so there you go. So, but I really don't know for sure. Yes.
As he was talking about the schoolhouse, I think I understood the comment was that the teacher lived next door with one of the parents of one of the kids. And I think that was very typical in the old days. So I found that was an interesting comment.
Yep, you're right. And I know in Missisquoi County, there was a lot of itinerant teachers that would board with families. The families wouldn't know when school was in session unless the teacher came and was boarding and would light the fire in the schoolhouse, and then people would see, the schoolmistress is back in town. So, and until they put a second story on the schoolhouse, like Marcel said, and the teacher lived upstairs, I think you're right. I think that teachers were just simply boarded in with the community. And that little school, I believe, was both was mostly French children, but the community, when Marcel pointed out these are the people that lived here, you'll see that there was a lot of English, Irish, and French names. It was a very multilingual community. Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, wait a sec. We'll give you the microphone.
Okay. Jumping ahead to the future, with COVID and people having to work from home, they didn't really stop working from home after COVID shrank. It's coming back a bit, but a lot of people are working from home, and a lot of people are moving away from cities because country areas are cheaper to live in, and people are smart and they're moving to the country because they can work online as long as they have good internet. And I heard a statistic that perhaps 60% of U.S. employees are working from home online.
So it may be bringing people back into rural communities, perhaps?
Quebec has a little problem with the rural green zone, white zone. If that could be ameliorated somehow, then people could repopulate these areas.
Perhaps, indeed. Well, as Marcel said, he is the sole occupant of Malmaison now. So, and there are actually no other houses. We would have to probably build and live in the next community, either Notre Dame de Stambridge or Pike River. It's very much an agricultural community. Dairy farming is dairy and oats and grasses growing for sure. But dairy farming is the big industry in that particular region of Missisquoi County. All right, thank you for your questions. And again, I'm sorry Marcel wasn't here to carry on because he's very knowledgeable about his community. But anyway, it was a marvelous film, and we're very grateful for his participation. So on we go with the next film. Hi, I'm Heather Darch, and this is a presentation by the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. In this series called Raising Spirits, we are telling the stories of our vanishing heritage. In small, waning, or all but disappeared villages and hamlets, the foundations of homes, barns, and churches sink a little lower. The grass and brambles grow higher, and stone walls and gravestones crumble. These little communities that once represented the dreams and efforts of families in the early settlement era of Quebec's eastern townships are now mere crossroads. The ruins, foundations, and gravestones give up their silent testimony to the people who started with nothing but their hopes and dreams, and who sometimes had to leave their dreams behind them. This is Heathton.
The community of Heathton, as I remember it when I was here in the summertime, there was a church at the corner of Heathton there. My mother would take me there in the summertime to go to service. It had no electricity, just had kerosene lamps and a wood stove, but in the summertime you didn't need that. But there, just a few buildings around and farms. At that time, in the 40s, there were farms. It was a farming community. And now it's changing. A lot of people actually are working online, people moving in who are working online. I'm George Weller, George Kelman Weller Jr. We are standing in the Heathton, Quebec Cemetery, and my settler ancestors are buried here. Josiah Keyser and his wife, Sarah Belknap, and one child. They moved here in 1809, down the road in South Barnston. No, South Barnston is the next town west of Heathton. This is in Heathton. We are physically about 3 or 4 miles north of the Vermont border, north of Holland, Vermont, and about 8 miles east of 55, Stansted. And this whole area was all settled by English-speaking people. A lot from the US, a few from England and Europe, but there were no French here, none. And one of the things about the area is they were not United Empire loyalists, they were just here for cheap land.
Heathton was settled by the Heath family, who arrived early on in the opening of Barnston Township. John Heath was born in 1771 in Plymouth, New Hampshire. He married Margaret Mosher, and together they had 10 children. In 1806, John and Margaret purchased land from the agents Lester and Morrow. The tract of land purchased by the Heaths eventually became known as Heathton. The Heath family was large and married into other pioneer families in the area who were opening up farms and clearing land at the same time. The blending together of families can be clearly seen in the Heathton Cemetery, which also speaks to the important network of help and solidarity that developed in order to succeed in this newly opened land and the creation of stable communities. Some of these early hamlets and villages in Barnston Township still exist, including Baldwin's Mills and Ways Mills. Others, on the other hand, like Heathton, are no more than a place name at a crossroads.
This is Heathton, and this is the corner of Heathton, and there was a church right here at one time, and I believe my mother said there was a blacksmith shop here, and that's pretty much what is Heathton. And my ancestors are down the road a little bit over at South Barnston. You know, the War of 1812, my ancestors there, the kids were playing in the yard and thought they detected thunder, thought they heard noise. You know, they did hear noise. And so they ran in the house and said, "Daddy, Daddy, it's gonna rain. You hear thunder." Daddy came out and said, "No, the sun's shining." And he said, "No, no, no, come put your ear in the ground. Listen." And sure enough, you could hear booming. The next day or 2 days later, a scout came along, said there's a battle going on at Plattsburgh, New York. They could detect the cannon fire from the War of 1812. So this area here is stage road going through and road down to Ways Mills this way. But back in 1800, this was just a bog here. And you couldn't go from South Barnston and Heathton to Stansted because it was a big bog. So my great-great-grandfather and other neighbors, they corduroyed this bog and made a road. You take a bunch of these trees and you lay them down one next to the other, and then you put dirt or gravel or something on top, and then you can go across it. And then it's sort of like a floating bridge. But that's what they did, and that's what made a road between Heath and South Barnston to Stansted possible. Yeah, it's a different way when you're conquering the land and you want to go somewhere, then you figure a way to do it. The way you could make actual cash money was by burning trees and taking the ash and dripping water through it and making pearl ash. It was a potassium compound. It was a product that you could actually sell and make money and pay taxes or pay your property off, whatever. So that's an initial thing. You had to clear land for your agriculture, for farming cows and whatnot. But you could also take the trees that you cut down, didn't have a sawmill, then you could burn them and make pearl ash. This is Josiah Keyser, K-E-Y-S-E-R. This is Sarah Dunlap Keyser. I think that's K-E-Z-A-R. And the other one is K-E-Y-S-E-R. So the spellings were different. This was the original Keyser that was maybe 2 when the family moved to this area, maybe a little older. Married Sarah Belknap and stayed. All the rest of the Keysers moved west. Now, why did they go west? 2 things. One, they came in 1809, and in 1816, Tambora Island in the Pacific Ocean blew up and put a massive amount of dust in the atmosphere. It was like a nuclear winter. So in the summer, they had a freeze every month. Things would grow for a long time, and then bam, would freeze. And they plant new stuff, and then freeze. But the winter was warmer than normal. It froze just barely because of the atmosphere. There was that, and the second thing that happened in 1825, the Erie Canal opened up. So anybody that was having difficulty farming here or whatever, they had the opportunity to move west. You know, the concept, move west, young man? Well, a lot did. The challenges for the community that I can see, I mean, I don't live back then, but from what I've heard, some of them were religious. Like Heathton here had a Methodist church. On my grandfather's farm, great-grandpa built an Adventist church. Adventist has a nice history, starting with the Millerites. They believed the end of the world was coming, and Miller was challenged when, he finally decided when, it didn't happen. But anyway, so I guess you couldn't work really on Sunday, so my grandfather's brother died, and then his wife eventually sold the land to my dad because they were having financial trouble, because you can't have a farm and milk cows and whatnot and not work very hard on Sunday too. So that's one of the challenges. The challenge in agriculture is always getting some money to pay whatever bills you have to have. So some people go away and take jobs. Lots of times farm families, both in the US and Canada, somebody will be out working, trying to bring in more money to keep the farm going. Even if you have 1,000 acres or several thousand acres, there's still never quite enough money. Times were tough back then, but people had the freedom to do what they wanted. There was critters in the woods to shoot for meat. You could clear land and grow something. Stories that I heard from my ancestors said, if you could see smoke from somebody's chimney, you were too close, you needed to move. So that's the way pioneer ancestors thought. Well, it was a community of people who were here, energetic, and clearing land and building a life and farm and kids and whatnot. And now it's evolved to the point where it's farms and there's no more town. It's just a crossroads, which is Heathton.
Well, I'm delighted to say we have the star of Heathton in our midst today. So, Mr. George Weller, would you like to come to the front, please? Come up to the front. Thank you. Yes, you. George was a good character to have on this tour. He just stuck right in there with us when it was 35 degrees in the sun, and you hung in there the entire day as you took us all through Heathton and South Barnston. And George, I just wanted to ask you, the audience might have a few questions for you, but I wondered if you could tell us how the road has changed since you were a kid going along the road. How's it different now?
You're talking about Stage Road.
Yes.
Okay, well, on old maps, Stage Road went from the border on up to Quebec City. And when I was young, really young, I was born in 1940, during World War II, the US and Canada, maybe mostly with US money, they paved the road with concrete all the way for a long ways. So if you're down in Stansted area and going down to Derby and Newport, driving along, you'll feel the car going thump, 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 thump. that's the division line between each pad of concrete. And unless you rip up the concrete and just pave it, you'll have that always. For Sage Road, where we are, when I was coming up in the summertime from New Jersey with my family, my dad bought it for my mom as a summer place in '37, and then my mother died, and then I bought it from my dad in '70. Anyway, back then, the road was a gravel road, and it's going back to gravel now at the moment. We'll try and fix that, but anyway, it was a gravel road, and there were there are two covered bridges that we had to go across or go through, coming from town to where we are. And then the covered bridges were taken down and put regular bridges. And then it was a gravel road. And then one time I flew with my first wife out to Michigan, I guess. And when we flew back, I noticed that the road was paved. So, whoa, good. So I flew along. It was paved all the way to Bollins Mills. Yay. So then the pavement, I guess, had been recycled tar from the auto route, and they didn't add enough binder, tar or whatever, to the ground up asphalt. And so it deteriorated over a couple of years. So they decided to rip it up. So then it was gripped up gravel for a while. Then they decided to pave part of it. So they paved it up, not quite to the Barnston line. And then since they didn't do a really good base underneath, the weather took over, the climate took over, as it always does. And the cold made the ground heave underneath the road because it got damp. And so it cracked the tar. And so the tar started to come apart. And so they ripped up the tar. And then, so now at the moment, they have a tar road, an asphalt road, going from the Stansted town line up to not quite our house. And anyway, maybe in the future they'll redo a better base and continue a tar road.
Thanks, George. Can you tell me what happened to the old church before you go? We talked about how it was at the crossroads, but do you know what happened to it?
Okay, you're talking about the Heathton Church.
Right.
The Heathton Church, I understand, was just moved. I think it was moved. I don't know where. I know my grandfather, the church, the Adventist church on my grandfather's farm was just taken down. I mean, there weren't enough people left. And one thing, great-grandfather gave the land, an acre or so, for the church and materials to build it. And he didn't put in the deed that if it ever was become defunct, that it would come back to the family. So in the end, it was just given to the local farmer.
Well, there you go. One of those stories that you just wouldn't know unless someone remembered the story and remembered Heathton. We have a question here. There we come with the microphone.
Just to comment, having to travel across that spot, which was, I think, Beaver Pond, twice a day or more, which I do every day of my life, I can say it's still bad. 200 years after that corduroy road was put, I think there are still logs coming out of the ground. It's terrible.
Because they just kept putting gravel on it. And the logs, of course, are not gravel. They're actually wood. And wood deteriorates over time and compresses. And until it becomes coal, like a million years from now, it will be the same.
Well, it's amazing. You're an inventor. You could probably figure out a way to fix that road.
Thank you so much, George. Any other questions about Heathton? Yes.
if you read the journals, especially of the United States at that period, and people moved all the time. And in fact, I mean, if you read like Lincoln's biography, okay, his family itself, before he even became an adult in Illinois, moved from Kentucky, I think, once or twice, and then on to Illinois twice. And in fact, most people didn't stay in the same area, certainly in the Midwestern United States, but migrated westward between almost every 5 to 10 years. Now, it's so kind of when you look at the Eastern Townships, which is interesting, was there the same basically among the mass of the population, I guess the English-speaking population, which was American to begin with, of course, a lot of it, were they constantly moving west too? I know, for example, in the North Graveyard near Hatley, if you look at the gravestones, not a majority, but a significant minority of the people who were buried there either came back from the west, or in fact, it remarks on the gravestones that many of their relatives went west, usually in the 30s and 40s. And I was wondering, in a sense, you sort of think, you kind of look at the population of the Eastern Townships, the English-speaking population of the Eastern Townships, and you sort of see some of the families that are still here. And in fact, it's remarkable that they're still here, considering that whole demographic movement west. Or is it? I don't know. I'm just speculating. Did most of the people go west?
To tell you the absolute truth, 100%, I don't know.
I actually don't know myself. I know there was
somebody would have to do an actual study.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right, eh? It's interesting, isn't it? But you don't hear much about it, do you? The people going west.
I know there was a definite migration south back into
Yeah,
Boston
yeah.
and the steel mills and further south, and but I'm not sure about west. Maybe I have no idea. If anyone in the room knows, I will pass the microphone to you.
One little comment about going west. I said that all of my family went west. All the Keezers went west, except for Josiah Jr., who fell in love with Sarah Belknap and stayed. One of the ones who went west, who I know about, and I've been to the location that's important there, they became wealthy, and they left the money for Keezer Stadium in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park.
Wow, there you go. A connection to the townships. That's nice. Thank you so much, George. We had a marvelous day with you. George is, as we said, an innovative townshipper under your name. I think we put something creative like that because George does everything from operates an airport to raises golden retriever puppies, et cetera, et cetera. So he's quite an interesting fellow, and we appreciate the time you gave to us that day and to tell us all about the Stage Road and Heathden. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Heather Darch, and this is a presentation by the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. In this series called Raising Spirits, we are telling the stories of our vanishing heritage, the small disappearing villages and hamlets that dotted the landscape of the Eastern Townships, once represented the first communities of settlers in this region of Quebec. The crossroads, scattered houses, the foundations of barns, and perhaps even railway tracks represent the people who came with what they could carry and who worked hard to establish a life for their families, while at the same time created vibrant and busy villages. Today, many of these early settlements that developed in the 19th century have since passed into memory. This is Gould Station.
My whole life growing up in Gould Station, it's always been a very quiet little area. There's Epsa's house, which Denise comes 1 month in the summer. I live here full-time year-round. And then there's the Allises who live across the track. So my whole life it's always been like these two houses. If you want to go a mile up the road, there's more neighbors, but they're further. So we've always been kind of close. And like Steven, sometimes he'll come over and he'll make tracks in my driveway and like help me get unstuck, things like that. Like he pops over about once a month and we chat and check in, see what's new, see what's going on. Yeah, that's Gould Station. It's always pretty quiet. I'm Rebecca Macmillan. I'm currently in Gould Station in Barrie, and Gould Station used to be its own little village. A lot of the people came into this area from either Scotland or the surrounding Scottish settlements, so from Barrie, from Canterbury, from Keith, West Keith, and the surrounding areas. Most of the people came in 1875 when the railroad came because they came to work in the lumber mills or in the forestry area. There was some farming going on, but most people worked in the mills. Some of the Scottish people came to the area because of the enclosure going on in Scotland. A lot of the different Scottish people were pushed out. My paternal grandfather's side went from Scotland to Ireland, and then there was the potato famine, and then they came to Canada because they just said, might as well, like it can't get worse, right? So they came that way. At that time, they were giving out land in this area. They were trying to get settlements going. So they said, we will give you land. You have 10 years to clear it and make a settlement on it. So you had to have a house and a barn at some point after the 10 years. If you didn't, then they would take the land back and they would give it to somebody else, which a lot of the people said wasn't fair because I've got it 3/4 cleared, like I've done all the hard work. So right now we're currently at the Macmillan farm. This farm has been in my family for 5 generations. It was registered in 1901 with my family, but they had bought the land and were making payments on it beforehand. One of the easy ways to see where a lot of the old Scottish houses were is the orchards. So most houses around had an orchard. So like here, our back lawn was the orchard. We have 4 apple trees, and most of the houses around had at least 3 or 4 apple trees along the way, and they would use that for their preserves and their jellies. And a lot of houses also had rowan trees, or like we would call them mountain ash trees. So where my parents live, this is their property on the 214. So it used to be my great-grandmother Lila's. My father bought it from his grandmother. There's the house, and right behind the house, it looks like it's smoke coming out of the chimney, but it's a rowan, it's a mountain ash tree. And that's planted at the edge of the garden to keep the birds away from the garden and to go to the tree. The berries stay on the tree all winter, so it's good for the birds, and it keeps them away in the summer. But a lot of the Scottish people were very superstitious, and they thought that if you planted a rowan tree near your house, it would keep the bad spirits away. So a lot of the Scottish homes are in this area have mountain ash or rowan, whichever you want to call them, trees around their homes. And they also have a lot of orchards. There's a picture here of what Gould Station used to be. So we have the train track here, which is just outside below. This is the road and where it still is today. This house here is Allis's, so that's our neighbor just across the tracks. Behind them, a little ways, there's the blacksmith shop. That's no longer standing. There's the barn half of our barn is still standing. So we're right behind the Allis house on the Gould Station Road. It was the barn that went with the McLean house. They sold the fields and my grandpa bought them, but they kept the house. For a long time we had cattle here. We used it as a pasture. We used it as a hay field. This year it's oats in the back. For quite a few years we were just using it to store hay. The barnyard hasn't been used, and this past winter in 2022 going into 2023, the barn fell down during a snowstorm. So we'd have hay bales in there, and that was pretty much all we were using it for. Further down you have the mill building and you have the water tower. They had it because at that point the train was steam. So it would come, it would stop down at the tracks where the CPR pond is, and they would pump water from the pond into a little reservoir tank up into the water tower, and then they would drain it into the train so they could use it to power with steam. It also really helps when there's a fire. So the train was here in 1875. This is a picture of the station. So it used to be, as you can see, quite close to the track. And all of the stations would say which station they were on, so when the train was coming, you could see. And they have a hook, so they used to have the mail bag, and they would chuck it out, and it would land on the hook. My grandfather, Angus, and his sister, Sarah, they used to tell us the story of, because the train would stop here for the mail and to drop off things for the store, he and Sarah would get on the train here, take it to Scottstown and get off, and then walk across town to go to school. And he used to joke because one of the conductors would chew tobacco. And when he would chew tobacco, it would kind of slobber down onto his whiskers and into his beard. And when they were going down, it was so cold in the winter, he would chuckle because this guy had the chewing tobacco in his beard. It was one frozen beard by the time they got to Scottstown. And he said one day, though, he kind of bumped his nose like that and he broke off part of his beard because it was frozen. So he said he looked kind of funny for a couple of days until he trimmed his beard. But it was little things like that that were always kind of fun to hear growing up. My grandpa used to be a brakeman on the railroad, so his line that he worked was Mechanic to Farnham, and he would get on the train here, go to Mechanic, start working, and then go to Farnham, and then come back to Mechanic, sign out, stay on the train, and then get off here. And he would do that in the winter because there wasn't a lot of work around here in the winter. But my dad had to do chores while he did that. He did that for a couple of years, but he didn't like it very much because he was like, it's a lot of travel, and he was like, it's hard being the brakeman. Didn't really like it, but he did it for a number of years. But he got a little pension from it. And I asked him once, like, how much is your pension? And he was like, $22.50. And he was like, for years I've been getting $22.50. And he was like, it's not a lot, but he was like, well, I got a pension, so he was like, that's something. So it was kind of interesting to hear. Our area is called Gould Station, and one of the funny things is we're in Barrie, we're not Gould. And the reason of that is because there's Barrie, there's a little tiny pie shape of Linwick, St. Marguerite de Gould, and then there's Scottstown. And when the train was coming through Scottstown, they said it would go through Gould as a way to get Gould to pay to put the tracks down. Realistically, because of the Salmon River, with quite a big gully, and because of the terrain in that area, they didn't want to actually go all the way over to Gould. So what they did was really quite sneaky. Gould was told, you will have a station for Gould Station, but you have to pay for it. So they paid for it, and they had the train go from Scottstown, cross the little V, into Barrie. So this is the Gould Station train stop, And we were called Gould Station because we were supposed to be the train stop for the people of Gould, even though Gould is about 6-7 miles that way. Watch out for the thistles though. This is the old fuel pump line where it's the foundation, so it has cherries growing in it now. But they used to have a tank on top and you could pump fuel into your vehicles as needed, and this was one of the last things that's left from the old store. At the far end of the shop was where there used to be stables, so when people would come for the train, they would stable their horses. You would have the store, and then like you would get your mail, send a telegraph, or you could like pick up your groceries, whatnot. Yeah, it was a general store. They had wheat, they had barley, they had oats, they had seed, they had fertilizer. It's kind of a little mishmash of everything. So we're standing near the site right now of what used to be the Mackenzie Chapel in Gould Station. The chapel was built using some of the mill wood from the Reed lumber mill, and it was paid for by the Gould Station community. They raised the money to build it. It was eventually, well, the steeple was taken off, and then they eventually moved it to the village in Barrie, and it's now attached to the back of the cultural center on Main Street in Barrie. The steeple never made it over there with the church. I don't honestly know what happened to the steeple. People have speculated it was used for firewood and like just burned, but I honestly don't know what happened to it. So we're down in the bottom part of the pasture, right beside the train tracks. This is that I'm standing on is the chimney of the old mill, so Reed's Mill. And this is where a lot of the local lumber was harvested. And then from here back to the road, it was all lined up of all of the lumber that they would load onto the train and then ship it off to different places. There's not much left. Like you see the standing pillar, there's the chimney part. The chimney's actually quite long. If you look, it goes quite a ways back. So we're back at the other end of the little chimney. We're at where the firebox is. Inside the firebox, there's this wheel cog that they used to use. There's also another smaller wheel further down. And there's this old door that they used to have on it. And they would heat up put the fire in here. Smoke would go out the chimney, and they have 2 doors on the sides that would let the steam go through, and a lot of the machines in the mill were steam powered. You can kind of get an idea of how big it was. They had people working on the hand car crew. There's the section men for the train. You had people loading and unloading the train cars. You had the people actually working in the mill. And then you had the people that were unloading the train cars and like placing the wood around the mill yard. They would cut it, plane it. It was in logs. Some of them, they put the logs as whole logs on the train. Some of it was like cut up into boards. Shingles were sold to houses, sold to the church. But it was a pretty big production. But when the recession hit, things got pretty tight. Like between the sawmill here and the furniture factory in Scotstown, like it was too much. There wasn't enough money to go around and pay people, so they had to shut it. By about 45, the mill had closed and people were still living in the area, but were slowly starting to shift out. By the 50s or so, the train had stopped coming around, so it stopped having a stop here. So people weren't getting on the passenger train or loading any goods on the train, it just drives by. So a lot of people said like it's nothing left for us here. My grandfather's family went down to Billerica in Massachusetts, and they lived down there for a while. A lot of people went down to the States and worked various jobs down there, and then some of them later on in their lives would come back to Canada. Some of them stayed down there forever. I'm proud of the fact that like our family has been here for almost 125 years at this point. It kind of sucks that like so much of it has disappeared over the years. And even today, like just from my childhood when we had cattle in that field till now, like nature is taking it back, and like the little bit that is left you don't see very much unless you know where to look. But I like it. It is a very emotional connection to me because like for me this was always home, and I always felt like this is where I want to be. Even when I lived in town for 7 years for college and university, like I hated living in town. I really do. Like the tracks are kind of loud sometimes, but it's not the same as living out here where it's quiet. I have my birds, like I have good neighbors, lots of space. If I want to go for a 4-hour walk, I can. If I just want to have a bonfire, I can. Like it's nice.
Isn't it nice to have a young person talking about history in a room full of older folks? Rebecca, we'd love you to come to the front, please, just for a few minutes and say hi. We had a marvelous day with Rebecca. Yeah. Hello there. Rebecca, you have I'll get you to stand a little closer. You have such a passion for family history. How did that start for you?
Well, for me, my grandpa always talked about growing up in the area, his parents and his grandparents coming from Scotland. The running family joke was my grandfather's grandpa was a sailor, but he only went one way. He got on in Scotland, was supposed to sail back and forth between Canada and Scotland, but he got so seasick, he got off in Canada and never got back on, and he just stayed.
No, that's great. I mean, you have such a great collection of photos and digital photos and photo albums and collections from your grandparents. And so we had just a marvelous day with Rebecca because she just knew so much about her community. And for someone so young, it was wonderful for us. And she had us walking. My gosh, we were all over the place, and we had a delightful day. So I don't know if anybody in the audience has a few questions for Rebecca about Gould Station. I kind of laugh because you say Barry and I say Bury, so I don't know what the big difference is, but it maybe depends what side of the townships you live on. I don't know if you have a comment about that.
You say it however you say it.
Okay. There you go. Yeah, no, it was great. So thank you so much, Rebecca. I don't know if there's from the room. Yes, we have a question at the back.
Is there not another town called Gould, and they used to have a Scottish restaurant?
Yes,
I don't know how far that is from.
It's 7 miles away.
Okay.
That's where, that was the town where when they were paying for the train, that's where they thought the train station would be and not where it is at my house, 7 miles away. But that's actually Gould, and that's where everyone thought the train station would be because it's in the middle of town. But to get across the river and up the big gully, it was too steep for the steam-powered train, so they cut across Dutch Brook and then a mile uphill for Gould Station.
Anyway, apparently the food there was excellent.
Yep.
So what do you do now for money?
Right now, I'm a teacher at Alexander Galt Regional High School here in Lennoxville, and I've been teaching there for the last 6, almost 7 years.
Yes, I was a school teacher in Cookshire, and when we had parent-teacher nights or some kind of event going on at the school, some of the older people would come, sit in the audience, and talk in Gaelic among themselves. And I wondered if that still goes on.
Not as much anymore. A lot of the older Gaelic speakers have passed away, especially during COVID. The last really local lady would have been Jean McIver, and she passed away during COVID. But a lot of, like, I know my grandparents' generation, my grandma's mother, Lila, she would speak in Gaelic on the party line, and everyone's like, Lila, get off, talk in English or get off the phone. We need to know what's going on, like, speak English. But the older generation used it as like a secret language, so that, like, that was the important stuff that was said in Gaelic. And then during my grandmother's generation and my father's generation, a lot of the older people said, well, we're trying to assimilate more, so instead of teaching you Gaelic, we're going to teach you French, because they wanted us to be successful. And they thought Gaelic wasn't as important, but right now, a lot of people wish they knew more. And like my generation either doesn't know any, or we only know a few little things. And so like I basically only know like a few little insults or swear words that my grandpa used to let slip pretty often, or what my father learned. So, but when I was little, my grandmother used to go see John David in Scottstown, and he would be at the canteen, and David Allen would tell me, like, if you say, how are you in Gaelic, I'll give you an ice cream cone. So I had to say it, and then I would have to say, like, fine, thank you, and then, like, I'd get my ice cream cone. But that's, like, their little thing of just 2 sentences of trying to keep it alive.
I think the most important thing that people can give their kids is the ability to take on languages.
If anyone's interested in the local history, there are 2 books that have been written about the Canterbury area. The most recent one is by Gordon Parsons, and it's called Gould Station. You can get it on eBay. There's also an older book, and it's called Oatmeal and the Catechism, and a lot of the local history is also in that book. I think you can still get it on eBay, but it's much older.
What subject are you teaching at the high school?
I'm the homeroom teacher for the modified group, so I teach them English, math, history, geography, and science.
No history.
History, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. But it's a grade 6 group.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank goodness you're teaching history. That's wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca. Well, you can probably smell it. We have a lovely reception ready for you in the dining room. We're going to take an intermission, as they do in fancy movies, and we'll come back in a little bit. I'll give you a call to come back and sit down, but please go and have yourself a cup of tea or coffee and some of the refreshments prepared for you by the Uplands staff. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy your rest, your break. We have a beautiful a dining room set here in the Uplands Heritage Cultural Center in Sherbrooke at the Lennoxville end of it. And we've just been munching away. For those of you at home, I know you'll be jealous because there's been a beautiful spread given to us today from Julie Marlowe and her staff and volunteers. So it's just always a delight to come to the Uplands Center. So we're just coming in for our afternoon session now that our intermission is over. And we're going to begin with our next movies. And I've been told to keep it going. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming today.
I have a question.
Glenn has a question. Thank goodness.
I have a question from Facebook. One of our users was wondering, and maybe we can pass one of those mics to George. I know it's, I'm not sure if Julie's around, but were the headstones in Heathton photographed at any point?
Were the stones in Heathton photographed at any point? Is George with us? George is still eating. John, I don't know if you can answer that one. You'll have to use a microphone. You don't know? I know that George was part of it's called the Crystal Lake Cemetery Association. I'm not quite sure if I have the name perfectly right, but Crystal Lake. And I believe they look after a number of cemetery sites, and Heathton is actually one of them. And I know that George was a part of that committee for a long time and talked, and it's not on in the film, but he talked about how he used to mow the lawn and upright stones and try to protect the stones and weed whack around them. So you can see in the film that the cemetery is actually really well cared for and protected, which is great. It's what we always hope for when we get to heritage cemetery sites. You'll see one in the next the next film, and it's struggling to be protected, and only a few people know where it's located. In the next two films, there are people that have tried to maintain it with fencing and some weed whacking and that sort of thing, but a lot of our heritage sites are endangered, I would say. Yes, a question.
Microphone.
Microphone, please. One moment, please.
A general question about the archival images used in these films. I know they seem to have come from many different sources, but I'm impressed that a lot of these little towns, these former towns, have left us with images, even early photographic images in some cases. Maybe Rebecca, since you're here now, you could tell me about the images that were in the film about Gould Station. Are some of them from your own collection?
So we'll pass the microphone over to Rebecca so our online audience can hear what the answers are.
So a lot of the photos that were used are from my own families on albums. We also digitized them about 7 years ago when my grandfather passed away. And we donated some of the albums to the town archives. So that way they were digitized, posted on Facebook, and other people who were looking up the area can find them. The pictures are also shared on the Eastern Townships Roots Facebook page. So if you look under their different albums for Gould Station, there's an album and it has a lot of those same pictures. And the pictures were also shared with Gordon Parsons for his book that he did a few years ago.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. And a lot of the photographs came from local historical societies close to where we were speaking. So the Eastern Townships Resource Center, the Brome County Historical Society, Missisquoi Historical Society, Stansted Historical Society, but Library and Archives Canada. What am I missing? But you know what I mean. A lot of these places are actually do have a photographic record, and some of our speakers also gave images as well. So like Rebecca's and George from Heathton, and so we were lucky to have people that actually collected their own photographs as well. So we were able to use them.
Belding's Illustrated Atlas. It came out in the 1870s, I think.
Yeah, 1871, I believe.
Yeah. And we have a copy of that, and some of those pictures came from one of those because I recognize the pictures.
That's right, that's right. And we gave credit to all those images and the sources. And if you're watching online, you can stop the tape and you can read the sources that we used for the series. One more question.
wait for the mic this time. I have one actual request. I inherited a picture of the South Barnston post office and stagecoach stop from my mother, who was a collector. And I lent it to somebody a long time ago, and I don't know where it is. So if anybody ever finds it, it's a picture of the South Barnston. It says South Barnston PQ on it. It was the stagecoach stop and the post office. It was on my grandfather's farm.
Thank you, George. There you have it. We have a search on now for a missing photograph. Very good. All right, we'll move on with our Raising Spirits into our film. Hi, I'm Heather Darch, and this is a presentation by the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. In this series, we are telling the stories of our vanishing heritage. It's about men and women who made homes and opportunities from the dense forest of the eastern townships, who felled trees, burned potash, processed lime, and made successful farms and businesses. It's about the communities they founded that no longer exist, except for small markers, gravestones, foundations, relics, and ruins. We are looking for these vestiges of village and family life. This is Magoon's Point.
My personal interest relative to the village of Magoon's Point is twofold. As a historian, I'm always naturally curious about various communities and the history of various locales in this particular area. Personally, on the other side, my family, the Brevorts, were originally from Missisquoi, and they transplanted to this area and acquired a farm right on the actual point of Magoon's Point. And so my great-great-great-grandparents resided in this community and were quite active in the community. My great-great-great-great-grandfather was the postmaster, and he was a bit of a character as well. My name is Stephen Moore. I'm a local historian, and I'm past president of the Georgeville Historical Society, and I'm still a member of the board. Today we're located in Stansted Township, specifically in the one-time village of Magoon's Point in Stansted Township, which was part of Stansted County. Now it's part of the MRC of Lake Memphis-Magog. As you can see by looking around, there's nothing left to visualize as you pass along the roadside. There's no indication whatsoever that during the 1800s that this village ever existed. To find any evidence that there was a community here at one time, one has to go off-road, so to speak, and find various historical remnants that are found in the countryside. The location where we are right at the moment is a large promontory that extends out into Lake Memphis-Magog, and it acquired the name of Magoon's Point because the Magoons were one of the families that settled in this area, and they were quite numerous and they had large families, and so the name was derived from that. The actual location of the village is really tied to the lime industry, which got going as early as the 1820s. It's sandwiched right between the limestone quarries on one side of the road and the kiln, the refinement process down on the lakeshore. The raison d'etre for this village was initially the lime industry. Outcrops of limestone were found
above the road, and there was the process of extraction, and then the raw product was carted down to the lakeshore where there was a large stone kiln erected, and lime was produced in the kilns for sale throughout the townships. The original settlers to this area, like the rest of this whole region, were all usually Americans. They were seeking free land. The populations in New England at the time were becoming overextended, and there was a lot of land that was taken out of service by land speculators. So the only option for many New Englanders was to come north, where as of the Constitutional Act of 1791, the townships, or what we know as the Eastern Townships, was opened up for settlement. And for the sake of changing their allegiance to the British Crown, they were enabled to acquire usually in the vicinity of 200 acres each. So it was a great incentive. At the time, travel was made easy in terms of the natural inclinations of the mountains and the valleys and the river systems, which all ran in a north-south inclination. So for the first quarter century of the 19th century, travel through this area was relatively easy and wasn't really abated until the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825, and that sort of diverted in another direction. So the people around here that settled Magoons Point and all around Lake Memphremagog came from New England, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, all those areas, and they came up here to find free land and were able to prosper as a result. The actual village of Magoons Point was never very large. It was always a small hamlet. It didn't have many of the larger infrastructure that one would associate with larger communities like the villages of Georgeville and Fitch Bay. It didn't have any artisans to speak of. There were no religious institutions, for example. But it did have a post office. That was a major sign of acceptance in the greater world, because that enabled your community to be listed in the various directories that were published during the 1800s. It did have a cemetery, it did have a boarding house, it had various private residents, and of course nearby farms. The production of lime was only half the story relating to the history and the reason for the village of Magoons Point. The other half of the story was the agricultural industry surrounding the village and on Magoons Point itself. Back in the 1800s, when Stansted Township retained its original territorial limits, which today would include municipalities of Ogden and Stansted East, the farmland on Magoons Point was one of the most productive in the whole township. My great-great-grandfather's farm on the point, for example, was 270 acres, a good-sized farm. The production was mainly based on the dairy industry. The dairy herds on the point were considerably larger than the average for the whole township. Most farms, on average, kept approximately 4-point-something milking cows per farm, whereas my great-grandfather's farm, for example, had a herd of 25 milking cows, and there were 4 farmers on the point that had herds in the double digits. So it was a very productive area. The main product was the production of butter. The average was around 400 per farm township-wide. There were other larger producers that ranged from 700 to around 1,500 pounds of butter per year. Based on the 1871 census, we know that production here was much higher. My great-grandfather, for example, produced almost 4,000 pounds of butter. And the butter was found a ready market either in Montreal or to the south, primarily in the Boston area. And it was a major factor in the productivity of the farms in this area. All the farms, just by the nature of the land, had full sun exposure to the south, and so they reaped the benefits of their geographic position. Right now I'm standing on top of the lime kiln, which is where the limestone, which was extracted from the quarries above the road, was transported down here by wagon and horse and wagon, and it was deposited here on top of the lime kiln itself, and then the carts would continue on in a circular manner and circulate back up to the quarries for additional loads of limestone. The limestone was cooked in an oven-like kiln, very analogous to the production of maple syrup. The calcium in the limestone was cooked and evaporated until the residue became the actual lime that was produced here in the kilns. It was then loaded into barrels, loaded onto barges, and then transported by steamships all over the lake, as far away as Newport and up the main body of the lake, as well as up the arm of Fitch Bay, which is just around the point, up to the Ryder store in the village of Fitch Bay, where it was sold locally. The production of lime was an important commodity. It was used to spread on local agricultural fields to reduce the acidity of the soil. Lime was also used in the manufacture of mortar for building brick structures and stone fireplaces, what have you, as well as for the chinking of log cabins. There were also not only medicinal uses, but also as a disinfectant. Lime was spread on the carcasses of dead animals, for example. It was also, when diluted with water, was used as a whitewash in barns and stables, as a disinfectant and as a preventative for infection. So it was quite a valuable commodity. At the time, in 1871, the production of lime on Magoons Point was the largest industrial operation outside of the communities of Rock Island and Stansted. So it was a larger operation vis-a-vis all the sawmills in the township, and so it was a significant operation here on Magoons Point. Right now I'm standing on the site of the Magoon Point one-room schoolhouse. As you can see, all that's left is the stone foundation. Its location is rather odd. We don't know why it was located in this particular area, because it is some distance from the village proper, probably maybe half a mile. We can only speculate that perhaps the local landowner donated this particular plot of land for the purposes of having a school for the village. It was a typical country schoolhouse with a stove in the middle and students all huddled around trying to keep warm in the wintertime. At one point, my great-great-grandmother was the teacher, and also one of my great aunts was a teacher later on, and she was quite famous for letting the kids go up on the hillside up here and go sliding during the winter instead of tending to their schoolwork. We don't know much about the actual schoolhouse itself. We know it existed in 1881 because it appeared on the Belden Atlas. And when it was initially constructed, we're not sure. But it was the second generation of schoolhouse for this area. There was an earlier one, apparently. We have references to it, but we don't know where it was or how big it was. There was also apparently in the rock formation off to my side here, a large woodshed and outhouses, one on either side for girls and boys. And there's one notable story where apparently one of the local farmers' ram got loose and corralled the kids in the outhouse, and they couldn't get back to the school until somebody came and captured the ram. But that's just one of the local stories. But this particular school closed up in the 1920s when all the small one-room schoolhouses in the township were closed and amalgamated into larger schools in the nearby communities, larger communities of Georgeville and Fitch Bay. I don't know the circumstances of this one, but most of them were sold off to individuals who tore them down or used the wood or used them for other purposes. This is all that remains. When I was growing up, my grandmother was always telling me various tales about Magoon's Point, and she would often mention Still Brook. And I always thought it was reference to a local brook that just ran slow and still, and that's why it was named Still Brook. But as you can hear, it was not still at all. The real basis of the name was the fact that there was a moonshine still way up in the woods, and the brook itself was used to make moonshine by a member of the Magoon family. And there's quite a tale to it. Apparently, of course, this was all against government regulation, and the federal agents would often come looking for him, and they could never find Mr. Magoon or his still operation. I guess he would move it around from time to time and hide it, and they never did find him, but he was quite famous for producing moonshine for the local population. I'm standing in the middle of the abandoned cemetery of Magoon's Point. It's situated off the road a short distance, and currently is not visible from the road, so anybody passing by wouldn't even know that it existed here. The predominant name that you will see is Magoon, so the assumption is that it started off as a family cemetery for the Magoon family, and probably as the community grew, various other members from the area were also buried here. An inventory of stones was taken in the 1960s, and the earliest stone recorded at that point in time was the early 1820s. So we know the cemetery dates back at least to that time period. It is believed that it is a second-generation cemetery, that an earlier cemetery existed somewhere between here and Georgeville, nearby in this vicinity, but efforts to find it have proven fruitless. And so this is all that remains. The production of lime on Magoon's Point added an advantage because the percentage of calcium that was present in the limestone in this particular area was advantageous because it was higher vis-a-vis the other areas. Ironically, that percentage of calcium was, in the end, its death knell, because in the area northeast of Sherbrooke, in the area known as Bishopton and Lime Ridge, the percentage of calcium was even higher. So although the production of lime in that particular area dated back to the early 1800s like it did here, eventually, because of its higher calcium content, it warranted production on a massive scale. And so it just, in effect, put the production of lime in this particular area and all around Lake Memphremagog out of production. It just wasn't profitable anymore because they had a greater advantage. And so by the turn of the century, by the end of the 1800s, the production of lime here on Magoon's Point just faded away. It was the beginning of the end for the village of Magoon's Point. A little bit later, in the early 1900s, the production of butter continued on, but that, together with the effects of the Great Depression, was the final death knell, not only for Magoon's Point, but for also a lot of area villages. What really brought the end agriculturally was the closing of the border in 1930 to the import of butter into the United States. The Americans wanted to protect their own farmers and dairy operations, and so they closed the border, and that was the end. And so from there on, even the local farms started to die off. So in the end, Magoon's Point became a lost village. As you drive down the road, there's no sign whatsoever that there was any habitation here whatsoever. All you see is open agricultural fields. So the memory, the history of the people that once lived here is more or less gone forever, except for people like myself who are interested in history and local historical society who try to document what occurred here. It's important to remember the people that lived here, they had lives, they had families, they pursued social interactivity, and it's important to remember that there was an existence here for those families.
There, Magoon's Point. Thank goodness for someone like Steve Moore, because we would not know it existed otherwise. And Steve, I wanted to know if you'd like to come up to the front, and people might have a few questions for you. We had a great day with Steve, and I mentioned the animals that have now call Magoon's Point home, and so we were lucky to get some deer and a porcupine wandering through the remnants of what were houses and barns. And Steve, is there a place we can find out more about Magoon's Point?
Not really. Back in the 90s, I prepared a speech for the Georgeville Historical Society, and at that time I looked everywhere, census records, and tried to find old photographs, and there's not a one that we know of that we can contribute or attribute to the village of Magoon's Point. So I've pretty much scoured the archives looking for information on Magoon's Point, and not much there.
We did too. The pictures that you see in the film are actually from Steve's own collection, from his own family. And we augmented them a bit from other images from the townships, but not necessarily Magoon's Point that you probably saw. So, but it's a marvelous story, and the production of lime was so important in the townships at that time.
That's right. Okay. One point that I'd like to bring out is the fact that back around 1860, a number of families from the Missisquoi, particularly the Clarenceville area, as far as we know, about 10 or 12 families pulled up stakes and moved to Stansted Township. And 3 or 4 of the families settled right on Magoon's Point, including my own ancestors, the Brevoorts. But there were a number of families known to the areas like the Tryons, the Derricks, the Bullocks, and I can go on. And we're still trying to ascertain why all of a sudden these families pulled up stakes and came to Stansted Township. There weren't any different, the only thing going on at that particular point in time was the start of the American Civil War. And so the only difference in the economy of the townships at that time was the mining activity related to copper, because that was required for the war effort. But all these individuals, the heads of the families were farmers, and they came over here to Stansted Township, and they took up farming again. So that wasn't a factor in their, relocation. And for a number of years, I've been trying to find out why. I mean, I even researched over at Missisquoi, where Heather worked for a number of years, and they weren't even aware of the fact that these families undertook this migration to Stansted Township.
It's true. I can't even imagine why you would move away from Missisquoi County, but someone did.
I'd just like to Earlier, my friend Michael mentioned the fact that teachers sometimes boarded in the local community. Well, one of my great-great-grandmothers was, she graduated from McGill and she moved to Georgeville with her father, who had to relocate to the country. And she was able to secure a teaching job down on Magoons Point. And that particular situation where the teacher would, part of her remuneration was boarding at all the different local families for the students that attended the school. And my grandmother was boarding at one of the Brevoort families, and that's where she met her future husband. So it did happen, and I'm the result.
Romance in the Townships. Very good. Thank you, Steve. I don't know if there are any other questions from the audience, but it was a marvelous day we spent with you and learned so much about Magoons Point. And I'm glad you've written it down, because it's these kinds of stories that are getting lost, and little villages like Magoons Point that you would never know was actually there. I mean, we were surprised to find the village in the woods and with the porcupine living in it now. And so it was a great day, and thank you for that time that you gave us at Magoons Point. Yeah, thank you. Oh, there we go, a question.
I'm just wondering, when I was about 21, or maybe 9, we went exploring down there looking for the lime kiln, and with you, because we were taking a bishop's course in geography. Anyway, I'm wondering if you've had to spend a lot of time exploring and searching for lime kilns and
I've
graveyards.
scoured that
and
whole
I bet you
countryside.
have.
In fact, for years, I looked for the actual quarry. Apparently, there was a large one and a couple of smaller ones, and I looked all through the woods and across. I gave up. I spent almost a whole day looking for this quarry, and so I headed back down towards the road and across this big field, and there were some trees on the edge of the field, and the way I came up off to the side where there was like a field leading down to the road. So I thought, well, I'll just take a shortcut through the trees, and within like 5 or 10 feet, I almost fell into the quarry itself because it just went straight down off the side, and and I also looked all over for the original schoolhouse, and also the original cemetery, and I've spent numerous undertakings trying to find either one, but no luck.
But you found the foundation for the schoolhouse, is that?
Yes, well, that was the second one. That schoolhouse dated from the late 1880s.
And that was a great picture you gave us of the little kids sitting on top of the outhouse, too. Yeah. So.
One of those children was my grandmother, I believe.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, another question.
I noticed in one of the pictures where you had all the cows, there were a bunch of ladies carrying pails. I mean, were the cows milked by the ladies? Or?
Yeah, that's from a Library and Archives collection image that yes, of course, women were very much involved in milking on farms, still are. And so it's, what I thought was amusing was the shoes that they had on. Not all of them had proper boots on, but yeah, for sure, women were very much involved in dairy production in the townships, so yeah.
There's just one little story I'd like to tell. My great-great-grandmother was looking out her kitchen window, and the farmhouse was situated right on the point, and the orientation was looking due south. And her husband, my great-great-grandfather, had walked down across the ice to Newport to get supplies. And so she was looking out the kitchen window, and she saw him approaching, and she saw him fall through the ice. It's hard to imagine what she was going through, and but to her surprise, he had pulled out a small penknife and picked his way into the ice and pulled himself up out of the ice. But you can imagine the horror she must have gone through in those few seconds until he actually saved himself.
That's a crazy story. Good one. Yes, go ahead.
My Tryon ancestors came from Caldwell's Manor to the Fitchbay area, and I believe my great-great-grandfather was involved with the ashery, the potash business. Would that be before the lime kiln?
I doubt if it was before.
They came in 1859.
Well, that would have been later, because the lime, they started producing lime back in the 1820s.
No, this was when they burned the trees and made the potash.
That was a separate undertaking.
I know, but...
And I know, for example, that the Tryons were one of the families that came from the Clarenceville area and actually settled on the point before they relocated towards Magog.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Oh, one more question.
Well, to deal with the chemistry of that, I do have a degree in chemistry, but potash and killing trees, burning trees to make pearl ash, to make potash, is to make more potassium salts, whereas lime that was harvested there is a calcium compound.
Right.
It's a calcium carbonate, basically.
Yeah. I know the production of lime was based on the percentage of calcium within the rock.
Right.
And so if you went and visited the quarry, you can see the rock is a upward inclination on the side of the banks, and they would just pry it off. It's almost like slate sort of thing, and they would load it into the carts, take it down to the kiln, and then bake it to reduce the
But also
calcium content, I believe.
Because of that calcium, the cows did really well.
That could be.
The grass and products grew really well. They didn't have to lime the fields because it already had calcium.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. That's wonderful. On to our last film. Hi, I'm Heather Darch, and this is a presentation by the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. In this series called Raising Spirits, we are telling the stories of our vanishing heritage. Affordable land and a chance to start anew seemed too good to be true. Yet this was the lure that brought many settlers into Quebec's eastern townships from the United States and the British Isles. Through rough-cut tracks in the woods, people made their way into unknown territory. Small communities dotted the landscape, usually around the first grist and flour mills. And here they made potash, established schools and churches, cleared the land for farming, and created their own economies from forestry and mining. They tried to survive and thrive. Time has taken its toll on many of these early places. This is Lost Nation.
One day, a friend I was talking with said, "Oh yeah, we were up driving around in Lost Nation, and where is this place?" And so I always like driving the back roads. That's kind of my hobby, is to run the back roads and discover new places. So yeah, I took a drive up in there and was quite captivated with how beautiful it was and how there wasn't a town there. So then I started digging around in some of the local history books and discovered that there was this once vibrant community. So it captured my imagination. I'm Morris Crossfield. I'm a local history buff, and today we're in Lost Nation. So Lost Nation is just to the east of Knowlton and up in the hills a little bit. Back in the early 1800s, the Fuller family moved there, and the Dudleys and a few others, and initially it was called Pleasant Valley. And you know, it is, when you get a look at this place, it's absolutely gorgeous up there. The area was settled by what some historians would call late loyalists. And they showed up in the early 1800s after things had calmed down in the States. Maybe they looked at how the United States were shaping up and didn't like what they saw. Maybe they came for the free land or the chance to make their fortune. So they were the first settlers in the area, and that, like I say, early 1800s. Over the years they developed, they had a schoolhouse, they had a couple of blacksmith shops, they had the old Prime Tavern, which was the stop on the St. John's to Stansted stagecoach line. It was kind of a happening little town. They had everything except a church. One day, a couple of traveling preachers showed up, and they moved into the schoolhouse and they started holding these nighttime revivals. And since there wasn't much else to do, everybody went to the revivals. And at the end of every night, the collection plate got passed around. And after a week of this, people were thinking that these guys were charlatans. And they started giving them a hard time, were really quite rude to them, basically ran them out of town. And as legend has it, as the preachers were leaving town, they said, "Oh, what a lost nation of souls is this?" And so that's how Lost Nation became Lost Nation.
Back in the year of 1838, in the history of Bolton West, there was a little place just round the bend, cutting their way among the wilderness. They were building homes, they were settling the land, they were doing the best that simple folk can, when a shadow held sway and still to this day sealed the fate of Lost Nation.
People lived through forestry up there. I mean, it's not really great farmland. It's gravel and trees. And trees were such an integral part of their lives then. Potash making, lumber, firewood, that's all there was. So you lived and died by trees.
Well, you can't ask a penny from a poor man without giving him something he don't already have. And the preachers asking money to save their souls would never have been trusted by this wayward clan.
They were mostly, we would say, from like the United Kingdom. They're British, Irish, Scottish. Later years, a few Francophone families moved in, the Bissonets, and they actually ended up in later years owning the old Prime Tavern, which at that point was a farmhouse. And there was actually a bit of a tale around that because the elder Bissonet was murdered. It turned out it was a neighbor. This was in the 1950s, and they had a party line. And one of the neighbors was listening in on what his neighbors were up to and discovered that the elder Bissonet had money in his house. That became known as the party line murders. And that building also no longer exists. So here we are at the intersection of Fuller Road and Stagecoach. Stagecoach was the line between Saint Jean to Stansted, and it's one of the oldest roads in the townships. The idea that stagecoaches and various things went up and down this, it's kind of mind-boggling because it's like big growler rocks from the Ice Age and all kinds of stuff. So And this would have been the metropolitan downtown core of Lost Nation. According to the maps, there probably would have been 20, 25 houses here at one point in time, but now we're basically down to the occasional home here or there, and yeah, not much else. All the businesses are gone, the schoolhouse, everything. This church began its life as Joseph Fuller's tannery, and I guess when he didn't have a use for it anymore, it was donated to become an Anglican church down here in the valley. And the story behind it is that young John Pybus was put in charge of the horses to drive it down here. So it probably was brought down on skids and logs and various things. And John Pybus was 14 years old, but was known as having good skill with the horses, as they said. So this young man had to, or got the opportunity to drive a church, which I think is something that should be on everybody's bucket list. It's remained here to this day. It's no longer active as a church. It's privately owned, but it is certainly one of the prettiest little churches in this part of the world. We are here at the Fuller Cemetery. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of a forlorn site that's hard to find, but we found it. There are gravestones here dating back into the 1820s and 30s. Various families from Lost Nation, children that didn't survive, ancestors of people who still live in the area today, some of them. It's just was neglected for many years. The local historical society has put up a chain link fence, but other than that, someone could walk by it and never even notice it was here. There's probably about 35 or 40 headstones here. Over here, we have the tombstone of Joseph Fuller. He was the first Fuller to come to this part of the world. And he died in 1872 at the ripe old age of 95, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment considering the lives these people lived. And he outlived his wife, Laura. She passed away in 1851. So here we have Levi Cooper, who died in January 11th, 1848. I think that's 87 years. It's hard to read a lot of these tombstones. When they cleaned up the site, they decided to leave them as is because in cleaning them up, they can be ruined and become unreadable. Mary Cooper, wife of Levi Cooper, and she died in 1830 something. And it's really hard to read now. Hey, someone left a flower. Nice to see that they still get visited from time to time. Oh, and there's another one here to a little tiny tombstone that isn't marked. It was quite common for children to not survive very long after birth, and they would be buried and they wouldn't even have their tombstone engraved. The people up there were quite isolated other than the stagecoach road going through. And at the same time, Paul Hall in Knowlton was building a mill here and really trying to create Knowlton as we know it. And it's funny that those preachers, as the song says, seem to curse the town because in 1840, Lester Ball discovered the Bolton Pass Road. And that was a more direct route coming from Lake Memphremagog through to Knowlton. So they lost a bunch of traffic going through Lost Nation from that. And then as the years went by, Knowlton got the railroad and just kind of built up to the point where Lost Nation just sort of dwindled away. The children started coming to school in Knowlton. Everything was done in Knowlton. Business was done in Knowlton. And Lost Nation at that point was little more than a collection of houses and lumber camps. So Knowlton became Knowlton and Lost Nation became Lost. And now there's practically nothing left to it. You know, I think when we're remembering history, we tend to focus too much on the movers and shakers, the big names, the grand men of history, you know? And I'm more interested in how Farmer Johnson settled his land and just how hard they worked to build something out of nothingness. I mean, the Eastern Townships, it was just trees. And so for every acre of land, you had to, you know, cut trees and move trees and pull up stumps, and just the amount of work involved is mind-boggling. It's no wonder that a lot of them died young and there was just no other alternative. So those to me feel very real, and they feel like they should be remembered for what they brought us, that everything we see in, you know, this part of the world has been shaped by human hands in one way or another.
And the roots withered and the rods pulled away. No more will folks be coming to stay, as the words were spoken by a man of God as they rode away. Oh, what a lost nation of souls is this. Oh, what a lost nation of souls is this. Oh, what a lost nation of souls is this.
Wasn't that a good one? And yeah, we were soaked. We started off, you could tell we were all dry. And then Morris got over the time. Yeah. So Morris, would you please come up? We'll have and say hi for a few moments. And while you're coming up, yay. I'd like to thank Sarah Biggs as well for the music that you can hear throughout. Thank you, Sarah.
Funny you mentioned that. One of the people on Facebook thought that sounded like Sarah Biggs. Great song.
Yeah.
Sheila Perry.
Very good. It was Sarah Biggs, her song Lost Nation. And of course, you can go and find it online, right, Sarah? Yep. So it's on YouTube, and it just fit perfectly with us. So, Morris, we just want to thank you, too, for the wonderful story that you told us. And you said you like to travel the back roads. How does that affected your writing? Because Morris, if you don't know, is a writer and an author, and I'm sure it's influenced you in some way.
Yeah, well, it's certainly given me a flavor for the townships. Yeah, even when I was at Bishop's here, I had my motorcycle. If I had a break between classes, off around Hatley and all over. And I'm always finding something new. I mean, I've lived basically, with the exception of 1 year, my entire life in the townships. I'm still finding new stuff. And I've still got a lot of places left to go. So, yeah.
More stories to come then.
Sure. Oh, yes, there's no shortage.
Are there any questions from the audience for Morris? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's a very deep question. I just want to situate Lost Nation. Many years ago, I was taking a drive, doing the back roads too, from Knowlton, going towards Bolton, East Bolton, I guess. And instead of taking the Bolton Pass Road, which is the paved road, I ended up going up over a mountain and going through the. Anyway, it seemed like a really rugged road, and there was actually a few farms up there, but everything on the side of the road was rocky. And would that be it? Is it along that road where Lost Nation is located, or?
Yeah, well, it'd be Stagecoach Road, which from your description, it sounds
I don't remember
about right.
what it was called. I don't know. I just ended up there for quite a few kilometers. It was
And
spectacular.
there's like hills.
Yeah, spectacular.
Yeah.
I had never known it existed, but now I have a name for it. It sounds like it was probably where I was anyway.
Yeah.
All right, cool, thanks.
Okay.
I thought it was incredible that you found a piece of music that went with the story. Elsa were married.
Yeah. Yeah. When I discovered the Lost Nation story, Sarah and I were working with some others on a local theater production where we did basically skits of local historic stuff. And yeah, my lovely wife came up with the song, and away we went.
Yeah, it added to the whole atmosphere of it for sure. And at the beginning of all of our films, that spooky looking place is Lost Nation for every single one of the films. And as I said, thanks to Allison's great drone shot. Yeah, every introduction that's actually Lost Nation. So, and we even had somebody stop and ask us if we were all right because we had stopped beside the road. So, there's another question at the back. Just one moment, please.
It's a statement. As you know, I came out to the townships from Montreal in the late 70s. I bought my first house out here up at Mont Glen in the Chemin Page, West Bolton. And a couple of days into my residence there, somebody said, "You should go see Lost Nation." I looked at them quizzically and I said, "How do I find a lost nation?" And then they started to explain what it was. And all over the years of traveling down like to Owl's Head to go skiing and taking the side roads like Stagecoach, Fuller Road, Baker Talc, all these wonderful roads. And then just to bring it to the present, Dr. John Foles. Do you know who Dr. John Foles is?
I don't.
I don't think he's originally from here, as I am not, but we fell in love with the place. And he, about 10, 12 years ago, got a group together, of which I participated, and many people in the greater Knowlton area, and it was to rescue lost cemeteries. And we did 3 cemeteries where, in this photograph, you see that white plastic chain around, which really doesn't do much, but it does significantly delineate what was the cemetery. And we worked hard on the tombstones and trying to secure them. And I think he's still active. We did, of the 3 cemeteries, I worked on 2. And very, very enriching to be doing that.
Yeah, it was a bit of a discovery. That I mean, I knew sort of roughly where it was. I'd had a couple of locals say, "Oh yeah, go down this gravel pit over here," and at one point I left these 2 and just said, "I'm going over there. I'll be back," and managed to find it. And as you can see, it was pouring rain that day. And then after being soaked to the bone, I had a dental appointment afterwards, and I'm laying in the chair completely soaked, and they're working on my face. But anyways, it was a fun adventure. These guys did an excellent job, I think, on all these documentaries. They were just, I learned a lot. Really.
That's good. Yeah, thank you. If it hadn't been for that plastic fence, I don't know if we would still be out there, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
We were kind of lost, so yeah. Sorry, Glenn.
Question from Facebook land. Susan Hall is asking, when was this filmed? I tried to find the Fuller Cemetery a few years ago with no luck.
So it was filmed this past summer in July, the hottest week of all time, in July, the end of July 2023. So it is still there for sure. Yeah, it's just a little hard to find. So, you know, we went through with umbrellas and camera equipment and backpacks, and yeah, it was quite the trek. So, but thanks to Morris, we were able to find it and carry on with our story. So.
And Lynn McAllister Brown says, just a quick hi to Maurice and Sarah from Saskatoon. Oh, hi.
Thanks for joining us from
Yes,
Saskatoon. That's great, awesome. All right, thank you. Eh? That's wonderful. Well, this brings us to the end of Raising Spirits, and I just have a question.
You know, this was very fascinating. So I'm just wondering, like, down the road, are you going to, you know, discover some other lost cities or towns and cemeteries?
That is the plan. We may take it out of the townships. There's lots of other places to explore, and then perhaps come back, because I know a lot of people have told us, oh, you should go here and you should go there. And townshippers know where their lost places are, which is really good. So yes, we plan to continue the series. If Allison's willing, then away we go. Yeah, so I was going to mention that today was filmed. It's recorded, so you can find this particular program if you'd like to watch it again on QAHN's Facebook page. But because it's recorded, all the films will be on QAHN's YouTube page as well, and you just have to type in, and Facebook, right? Am I saying it right? Yes? Okay, good. The tech is not my part of it. So, but yeah, everything's recorded, so you can go and grab a coffee and sit at your own computer and watch it again. You just type in QAHN, YouTube, and you'll find the series. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and there were other ones before this?
Yes, we had 3 years before this, 3 different series. It's called Scandal Makers. And they're all there too. This is our first in a new series called Raising Spirits. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I just have a few thanks of my own too. I just like to thank the Uplands Cultural and Heritage, Julie Marlowe and your team. Thank you so much for a wonderful, delicious meal, and for opening up your beautiful venue to us, and all your assistance in the tech as well. The day before, there was a lot of activity with Julie and Glenn and Allison setting all of this up. It goes down much faster, but setting it up takes hours and hours. So thank you, Julie. Thank you to QAHN's Executive Director, Matthew Farfan. Matthew actually came up with this idea. He thought, you know, maybe we could do something other than scandal makers. We were sort of thinking, oh, maybe we're running out of scandal makers. In the townships, probably not. But so Matthew said, oh, you know, let's try something else. So how about looking for lost places? So thank you, Matthew, for the idea, and then just giving us the freedom to go out there and film and find people and create what we did. So. Thank you. To QAHN's digital media specialist, Glenn Patterson and Allison Kirkwood, for all the technical support. Our special movie stars today, Marcel Helligan, who unfortunately couldn't be here. He's a farmer, so something must have come up. George Weller, Rebecca McMillan, Steve Moore, and Morris Crossfield. Thank you very much again for your talent and your knowledge. To our videographer and editor for the series, the wonderful Allison Kirkwood, for her beautiful work. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you to all of you for joining us today, and online as well. Thank you if you're tuning in from Facebook all over the place. We really appreciate you being with us. And as I said, to find our entire mini-series, including Scandal Makers and this new series, please go to QAHN's YouTube channel. And I think I can officially say that is a wrap. Thank you for coming.